Hi, thank you for coming today. We just have a kind of a generic press release, but a discussion about some other issues that have been happening in the city over the past few years. I'll start with the arrest that we made last night in conjunction with an investigation that started on July 6th. So on July 6th at approximately 1:50 a.m., the Portland Regional Communications Center received a 911 call for the report of a male threatening customers with a handgun at 408 Forest Avenue. The suspect had fled the store prior to the arrival of police. Officers learned that the suspect had displayed a handgun that was in his waistband while threatening to shoot people inside the restaurant before being removed by two individuals that he had entered the store with. It was reported that a firearm was later discharged at the scene, and evidence was located that substantiated these observations. Officers discovered a bullet casing and fragments of a bullet in the parking lot. Detectives quickly identified the suspect as 25-year-old Anthony Labor of Portland and began working on locating him. On July 8th of this year, a surveillance team located him at 42 Kellogg Street. At the time, there were several small children present, and they deemed that attempting to apprehend him was going to be too dangerous. Later that day, around 5 p.m., our surveillance team attempted to take him into custody, and he fled on foot but was arrested after a brief foot chase. Detectives then applied for a warrant for his residence at 42 Kellogg Street, and that warrant was executed later in the evening. During the search, handguns were recovered along with several other firearms, firearm components, drugs, cash, and evidence of drug trafficking. One of the firearms recovered appears to be a fully automatic rifle, and at this time we're having that tested to confirm that suspicion. Labor currently has been charged with criminal threatening with a dangerous weapon, threatening display of or possession of a concealed weapon, and violations of his conditions of release. Investigators are urging anyone who has information that might assist in this investigation to call us, and the numbers provided. And we can also be text messaged at that address on this press release that you'll get. In the last week, we've recovered three handguns used in other crimes. In two of those cases, they were polymer 80s without serial numbers, the so-called ghost guns. In one of those cases, it was in possession of a teenager and also involved in drug trafficking. Over the course of the past several weeks, we've had shootings down on Grant Street where multiple rounds were fired into the residence of people that had small children. Over the past several years, we've had a number of cases where rounds have been fired into the side of houses, entering children's bedrooms, and in some cases, a projectile being found in the crib of a child. We at the police department find this very troubling. It's a trend that we don't want to see continuing. Very concerned that we may have we've taken a high-capacity firearm off the streets along with probably a fully automatic machine gun in the hands of a person that was trafficking drugs. The youthfulness of the offenders that we're seeing, you'll remember several months ago at the end of winter, we conducted search warrants on multiple locations, and we seized handguns and other rifles, and a large amount of drugs, a large amount of cash, and the offenders in those cases ranged in age from like 16 to 19. It's a trend that we don't like seeing. We're afraid, where will this go? Will it be in our schools soon, and those type of things? These offenders are school-aged. Some of the potential victims, are infants to toddlers, that are in the crossfire of these dangerous acts. What we're finding is that most of these shootings involve some type of a disrespect that's occurred, a competing drug dealer, or some grudge or something that's going on, that these kids are choosing to go to a level of violence that, you know, is part of a video game or a movie. It's not what we should be seeing in real life. I've got some general statistics. In 2021, we had 17 incidents that we documented that were alleged shootings that occurred in the city. In some of those cases, everything's confirmed. We either found casings at a scene or we had recovered a weapon. In 2021, 17, 2022, we had 56, 2023, we had 43, and so far this year, we're at 23 incidents where we've confirmed shootings. Over the course of the last, I believe it's between 2 and 3 years, we've taken more than 100 handguns or rifles off of the street, and that's a very troubling trend. We've worked with our partners in the state. We have a close relationship with officers and detectives in the Lewiston, Auburn police departments because we're finding that we share a lot of the same offenders and the same incidents. We've worked with our federal partners to form groups. We have invested some effort to bring these cases to the federal courts when appropriate. And the most recent cases that we have had over the past couple of weeks will be hopefully reviewed by federal prosecutors and federal agents to see if we can bring those to the federal level for a higher level of prosecution and, you know, hopefully send messages through the community and, you know, that this isn't tolerated, we treat it seriously. We dedicate an inordinate amount of resources towards these. It has to be done. Anytime we have a shooting, we consider it just as serious as a murder. These have potential every time someone discharges a weapon to kill somebody. In these residential areas, in the bar areas of the Old Port, where we see these type of crimes happen often. Our housing units, our Section 8 housing, Portland Housing Authority properties have been the location of several of these shootings, and these areas are populated with families that have very small children, and it is just a matter of time before we see something similar to what you see in some of these larger cities where children are being killed by random gunfire. And we wanted just to make you aware of the amount of, you know, effort that we put towards this because it is a significant problem in the city of Portland. It's a public safety, public health risk, as the U.S. Surgeon General calls it too. It's very frustrating to us. At this time, that's about all I have that I can release regarding this investigation. I'll take a few questions.
Is there a common theme about the drugs? Like what kind of drugs are found here?
You know, it's a mix of everything. You know, prevalent in the city of Portland, cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl and heroin, you know, tend to be the significant drugs that bring violence with them. Pills are, you know, there's always other drugs that are, you know, you know, someone has, you know, one of the drugs, they probably have marijuana, might have, you know, a gabapentin or other, you know, pill form. But the four major drugs are the ones that I listed.
When it comes to this particular suspect that you arrested last night, is there any indication about where he may have obtained what you refer to as a machine gun?
That'll be part of the investigation. That will take some time to complete. But we will work with federal agencies that can help us in tracing the gun back to its origination point, where it was purchased, where it was transferred, and how it got to the individual that had it.
And that's alarming? Pretty alarming, right?
It's alarming, yeah. You know, for me to get a firearm that's under the National Firearms Act, it takes a background check, fingerprints, you know, a complete, you know, investigation of me, and for someone to have it, you know, is kind of troubling. We're usually notified in the city of Portland if someone applies for a suppressor or silencer or a short-barreled rifle. We get notified that they've applied for it so that we can check their criminal history. This subject's been a resident of the city of Portland. To my knowledge, I don't think we've got that request from the federal authorities to check his status with us. So it's all part of the investigation that we'll do.
Can you talk about the ghost gun thing again?
Sure. Yeah, the polymer 80 P80s come in a variety of, the manufacturers can sell these via the internet. There's no background check required for it. And then it's the frame of the gun, and then you just have to buy the trigger assembly, the barrels, and the slides to make them a fully functioning weapon. And most of that is done by mail order. The barrel, the slide, the trigger assemblies are all available through several online gun manufacturers and different sites. And then the frame itself is also available. And then you just have to have the, ability to open up a YouTube video to see how to put them together.
And you said you've recovered 3 of those?
In the past 2 weeks, we recovered 3 polymer 80s. And I can tell you, in the last couple of years, we've recovered several, and they're usually accompanied with drugs. And I want to say it was either last year or the year before, we recovered a polymer 80 with a suppressor attached to it, which was also manufactured outside of, the proper method, and it wasn't registered.
You mentioned some of these happened at Section 8 housing as well as the Housing Authority. Is the Housing Authority working with the department to address this issue?
The Housing Authority's been great with us, cooperating where they can. We work with them quite often. I don't want to say that the individuals that are in the housing are the cause of this. A lot of times, it's people that don't live there that are showing up and doing these shootings. But it was just to emphasize the fact that these places are usually for families with children, and that is the troubling thing, is that these fairly young kids, 16 to 19, 20-ish, are going into these places where there is absolutely no concern for the safety of small children that reside there, and it's to settle a grudge or a drug debt or whatever it might be.
You talked about this case specifically. So did this suspect go into the Crown Fried Chicken, right?
Correct.
And did he rob the place and didn't really say what he was trying to do?
No. There was some altercation. It's part of the continuing investigation. There was some altercation that occurred once he entered the store, and then he made a generic threat or a directed threat to people that were in this store. And I'm not going to get into the exact details on what he said, but it was enough to charge him with a crime.
But back to later on Monday, you said they were scoping the place out. We came from that neighborhood, I guess there's a playground. What time were they there earlier on Monday?
Oh, our officers on surveillance? We identified who he was fairly quickly. We established a potential residence, which was 42 Kellogg Street, and we set up surveillance for probably more than a day. And it was, we formalized, a better surveillance as we got more resources, and we were able to spot him outside of the house. And then, like I said, there were a number of children. That area is a fairly dense residential neighborhood. The officers at the scene did not feel it was safe to apprehend him or attempt the apprehension until he made his way further away from the residence so that we could isolate him. And fortunately, the decision was a proper one, and this subject, chose to try to flee into a playground area where some fleet-footed detectives caught him.
Were the handguns found, in possession of, the suspect, they were ghost guns, just to clarify?
On this case, individually, I'm not sure of the aspect of the guns themselves that were found. Several were known brands. They weren't ghost guns. I don't know if any components that were found were in this case. I just brought them up because, like I said, in the last week, we've got a teenager in possession of a ghost gun with drugs. And prior to that, we've also had it. But this individual's guns were, purchased through a licensed dealer probably at some point. And part of the investigation, whether or not it was him or somebody else that purchased them, if he purchased them, after the fact, from an individual, all those things will be investigated.
You talk about the larger, worry is that basically innocent people are going to get caught in the crossfire, right?
Correct.
And to me, that's always been a concern in Portland. But why has it reached a level where you feel it's, you know, those numbers, you know, to me, an armed robbery at the chicken place
Wasn't an armed robbery.
or whatever.
Yeah. It was criminal threatening.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, those bank robberies, they seem to happen quite
Yep.
frequently, and I just wonder why it's risen to the level where you're that concerned.
Yep. You know, bank robberies, usually we see it connected with drug use. You know, this kind of thing that happens in a store like that, you know, we're still looking to identify exactly why. You know, was it a beef that was occurring prior? Was it with one individual and other people were just in the store, you know, caught kind of in the crossfire? You know, and like I said, the shootings on Grant Street, you know, hundreds of individuals are in apartment buildings around where these gunshots were fired. You know, there's probably one person inside of an apartment that was the target of it, you know, either to send a message or, you know, in the attempts, you know, to hurt that individual. But that randomness, you know, just to fire rounds in such a haphazard way into buildings, into cars, you know, and then to go out, like in this case, to go in a parking lot, you know, and someone discharged a weapon after this dispute, it's very troubling. You know, those rounds can hit the ground, they can ricochet. When they're fired, you know, in the air or at a, you know, an angle, they could have hit up, you know, there's 3- and 4-story apartment buildings that surround that establishment. So those type of acts are very dangerous. And in a populated community, you can do this out in the woods, you know, with trees around you, but you're doing it inside the city with people living inside of buildings, it's incredibly dangerous. And, you know, we've come out to you a couple of times in the last year about, you know, our increase in firearms violence. And our officers, every day, we're stopping cars, we're getting drugs, we're getting guns. And, you know, our officers are in danger. Some of these weapons, you know, if this weapon turns out to be a fully automatic machine gun, you know, our officers are now outgunned, you know, if they have sufficient ammunition. And our body armor, you know, can't defeat some of these rounds that are being, you know, carried by individuals. And, you know, we have to, as an organization, we have to take it seriously. We have to do proactive enforcement. We have to identify offenders and make arrests where we can, and that's what we're doing. And that's why we take it so seriously. And we, you know, we've detectives on call 24/7. And quite honestly, the detectives that were on call this last week have probably come in almost every day and worked for the last 7 days that they've been on call, and for a variety of crimes, including this one.
Question, but I also think you have a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was curious about the offenders. You said a lot of them, or several, are between 6 and 19. Do you know how many of them?
16, yeah.
16 to 19,
Yeah.
sorry. Do you know how many of them from that 23 shootings have been those young offenders? Numbers on that?
Have been what offenders?
The young offenders between 16 to 19.
Unfortunately, we had something that ran over earlier, and I didn't get a chance to prep my notes as good as I wanted to. I don't have that number, but I can tell you that, you know, like I said, over the last year, under the age of 25 is a very high percentage of the people that we're encountering that have firearms and drugs. And just in the last week, what was it, a 16-year-old, and how old was the other kid, Nick? 19? 18? An 18-year-old from Yarmouth that were in possession of a firearm, ghost gun, and a significant quantity of drugs and cash. You know, it's with that much cash, they're dealing drugs, they're dealing it sufficiently. And when you're dealing drugs, it used to be this environment did not have conflicts between drug dealers very often. Lately, it seems like weekly we have a conflict between rival drug dealers and drug networks. And that's where we're getting this, I call it the big city crime. You know, what they're seeing in Detroit and some other bigger cities, we're seeing in Portland, Maine, which is very troubling. And like I said, we've been quick to work with our federal partners and our state partners. You know, we meet with the Maine State Police. The Maine State Police do a great job of tracking gun violence in the state. And they put out a bulletin, and almost every week Portland is listed as a location that had an act of gun violence. And we're working to turn that around and put an end to it. I feel like, we've taken so many guns and so many people off the street. The goal now is to keep them off the street. That's why we're working with federal partners, to try to strengthen, some sentencing for individuals and make them be held accountable.
To that point, a few years ago, there was this increase in gun violence that the city saw, and in response, the police department said that it would be increasing patrols in certain neighborhoods and taking some other initiatives to combat that. In response to this fresh round of increased gun violence, is there anything that the police department going to do in order to combat this further?
We're successful. We're doing the same thing. We're like I said, almost every week our officers are stopping somebody with guns and drugs, and we're taking them off the street. So what we're doing is working. I would love to be able to put out 10 officers every shift that could do this. Manpower is a hindrance to that. So we're working with the resources that we have. Every officer on the street, we share information as intelligence is found. We have detectives putting together portfolios of offenders, what they drive, where they hang, things like that, who their associates are, so that our officers have the best intelligence and the best information when they hit the street to know who these threats are and, to take action when something happens. And we're continuing to work, like I said, with our federal partners in that aspect. We reach out, for resources, immediately, and we get a positive response immediately from ATF or FBI or whoever it might be.
Do you see this as a continuation or like an escalation of previous issues, or do you see this as like a new wave or new incidents that are spawning?
It is very consistent with the trend over the last 3 years. We're seeing the same groups. The youthfulness of it is really what's surprising me. I've been on for 38 years. 30 years ago, it was 30-year-olds that we were dealing with. It was, it wasn't teenagers. Teenagers were drinking beer and maybe smoking weed, but we were not seeing them shooting at each other. So that has changed. In the last 3 years, it's been very consistent, and that's why, from 2021 to 2024, we've given you these stats to kind of show you that there's been a significant increase. Does it have to do with COVID? Does it have to do with, mental health of children, during the COVID years? I don't know. That's up to a researcher. But I can tell you that, the youthfulness of our offenders is very disturbing and shocking to all of us. And, our SWAT team took down a vehicle regarding the Gloucester and the Gray search warrants here in Portland and took guns and drugs out of it. And one of the SWAT team members, told me I was looking at the face of a baby, and as they're taking them out of the vehicles, and that was like, extremely concerning. And nobody here wants to shoot a 16-year-old, but they're armed with real guns. They're not airsoft guns. They're not BB guns. They're real guns. And this is happening so frequently that it is just a matter of time that one of our officers will be put in a position to take the life of somebody that's 16 years old.